week, so I appreciate it. And on the screen we have Scott and Ariel. Good to see you both. I think Neil was there earlier, maybe. And there's a good little batch of bodhisattvas here. Somehow they all got themselves down here. Takes a little effort, doesn't it? I doubt that many of us at 6:45 or when we had to leave were like, yippee, I've got so much energy, I'm so excited, I can't wait to, But we got here, Maybe you felt that way, that's wonderful. So, I've been talking to people more lately about what the program should be, kind of preparation for the new building, and there's a survey, and people email me and call me and stuff, and one of the things that was interesting and made sense to me was that there's a lot of diversity. And naturally there are several things where it could be this or it could be that, and so about half the people I hear from want this and the other half want that, right? So that's just how it goes. And one of those is not exactly about the schedule, but about how we do things. Let me just turn that off, there we go. Is I've gotten a fair amount of feedback in the last months, year or two maybe, about how wonderful it is if the talk isn't too long and there's time for discussion, maybe small groups, you can really talk. So I've been trying to do that. And then I also got the feedback, I hesitate to go because there's too much talking. So loud and busy, so. And, a person speaking, I think, identifies as an introvert and would like to be able to just be quiet, and that's beautiful. Both are beautiful, aren't they? To connect through language from the heart, especially when we have, kind of some settledness around it, like in a small group, is beautiful. And to be able to come here and practice and be glad to be here and interact with everyone completely silently and not say a word, that's beautiful too. So I thought maybe in terms of discussion times and or like small group discussion times, more or less every other time maybe. So anyway, I was thinking this would be a long talk, but then it doesn't. We'll see what happens. I don't really know what's going to happen. I don't know why I think I would know. But anyway, isn't that interesting? Yeah. Different strokes for different folks, as the song goes. So I want to explore something a little bit tonight that I think about a lot, and I feel like I never, I have trouble quite balancing it in my mind or quite saying it right, and it's an area people can have strong opinions about also. But some beginning of a conversation or continuing a conversation as a community around whether the practice emphasizes intensity and, intense, clear, you could say hard sometimes practice, and or the practice emphasizes accessibility, flexibility, adaptability, individual, modifications, and so on. And both feel important. And they seem at first to be a little bit like opposites. There's like the strict kind of practice and the relaxed kind of practice. Is there like a middle ground? Is there sometimes it's one, sometimes it's the other for any given person or any given community? And part of what's going on, I think, is we're sort of part of a trajectory and then a kind of a reaction to that trajectory as American Zen Center. Because American Zen started out pretty strongly on the intense side of the spectrum. when it was brought to the Euro-American mainstream culture anyway. Of course, Buddhism had been brought to immigrant communities 50 years, 100 years before. People like Suzuki Roshi, Chogyam Trungpa and stuff showed up in the 50s and 60s. But somehow, when this second wave that really led, most directly to what we're doing happened in the 50s and 60s, I don't know that someone like Suzuki Roshi thought this needs to be really intense and sort of harsh. I think he was just doing what he was doing and doing what he always did, and he had apparently, definitely some strength in practice, but also a lot of sweetness. But it seems like what happened is the students receiving these Asian teachers, who were mostly men, and the teachers were pretty much all men, really got hooked on a kind of a vision or kind of an idea of breakthrough experience, enlightenment writ large. And it just seemed natural that the way to get that would be, because that it would be really hard to get that, and the way to get that would be to work really hard and to practice really hard in a very sort of intense environment. So there's a big emphasis on pushing, trying, doing it really well, not moving, being just full on at all times. That this would lead to the outcome that this all seemed to be about. And one ingredient there was projections on the teacher, which certainly would have affected the teachers themselves. That the Roshi or the Rinpoche, the guru, kind of by definition, already has that, whatever that is, and has clear insight into everything and everybody, and is always right in everything they do or say, even if they do something weird or apparently unethical. That is still a manifestation of enlightenment, but we just don't understand why yet. We don't get it yet. In our particular lineage, as far as we know, Suzuki Roshi kept the precepts and was ethical, but as you know, there are many stories of teachers who didn't so much, including to some extent Suzuki Roshi's successor, Richard Baker, that he also received that projection that he himself had given to Suzuki Roshi. And that stuff changes you, So the whole thing started out kind of that way, in America. And then after this long series of scandals, and some people being seriously harmed for sure, some less so, a lot of soul searching and institutional changes and therapy and reparations, the practice gradually softened. For some, probably not quickly enough. For others, probably disturbingly quickly. And now on the main practice, and Buddhist practice in convert sanghas like ours, is gentler, more caring, more inclusive, has a bit of a clue about being trauma sensitive, tries to think about and understand the power dynamics involved, and how systemic injustices, such as around gender, race, sexual orientation, identification, aren't like just out there in the battled world, they're in here as well. And there's plenty further to go in that journey, that's for sure. But that's part of what happened, and it's a good thing, which I really agree with. It's a really good thing. And I and all of us, I'm sure, have a lot more to learn on this journey towards a Dharma that's responsive, loving, connected, and compassionate. But then the question comes up for me. Does anything get lost? Does anything important get lost in that process, that journey of making things safer, gentler, and more inclusive? are there actually some benefits to intensity in practice, to difficult practices, to sustaining practices, even when they challenge us in a lot of ways? And the challenge in all of this is it's so hard to know, you know what I mean? We all have our subjective opinions, but our ability to evaluate what's going on for us and what's going on in practice is shaky at best, right? Stuff's happening so much more below the surface than our conscious awareness is even understanding, you know? So I think it requires a lot of trust, I think, and a lot of patience and a lot of curiosity and a lot of openness to kind of explore this. Well, what's our way? You know, what's the most helpful way? Is it just one way? Is it a broad array of ways? And so I've been thinking about this for ages, and sometimes I don't express it as well as, or as clearly as I could, and maybe it comes out a little judgy sometimes, but I think we, in some ways, need both of these paths without the misogyny and guru worship. That, we'll just toss that in the garbage, but there was something there, is something there valuable. And so it was really fascinating to go to Japan and see both plenty of gentleness and kindness, and also to learn about some very intense ways of practice, like very intense. On the whole, Japanese culture appears, at least to us visitors, and the people we met anyway, extremely kind and polite, respectful and considerate, almost to sort of an extreme degree. One example of zillions, Razel and I took a little airporter bus to the airport. The driver got out before anybody, bowed to every person and thanked them for riding the bus. Every person, you know. Like, oh. And at the same time, you're like, oh, I'm nobody. You don't need to bow to me. And yeah, within and also within that culture, Buddhisms, there's lots of forms of Buddhism there. There's a lot of overlap between them too. Have constellated some very intense, hard practices. And we met some practitioners who experienced this and practiced in that way. And then the interesting thing was, at least the folks we met, came out the other side embodying kindness, humility, warmth. They seemed pretty clear and insightful too, and yeah, just really humble. And you could easily imagine somebody who did like a really, really like unimaginably hard practice would come out a little, you know, chuffed with himself, right? And a little proud and ready to be, and ready for everyone to be impressed by them, you know. Probably they should be given a high position of authority and yeah, a lot of nice stuff or something, but that wasn't the case. It's a pretty small sample size, just thinking of a couple of people, but people who did really intense practices. It really got me thinking about this again. What's the value of intense practice? How can it be done in a way that's healthy? Is there something lost if we're a little too quick to gentle practice? And I don't have an answer to that, but I want to tell you about one of the people we met. This was one of our favorite days on the trip. So we met a 48-year-old monk named Mitsunaga Endo, who is now not known by his name. Nobody actually called him by that name, but he's known by a title, which is Dai Ajari, because he completed like one of the hardest imaginable practices that I've ever heard of. And this is the deep practice called Kai-ho Gyo, which in English is often referred to as the marathon monk practice. It's a practice done on a particular sacred mountain that we got to visit called Mount Hiei. It's just above Kyoto, a little to the northeast. And his title is pretty intense, actually. Maybe he's used to being called this, but Dai Ajari, Dai means great, and Ajari is the Japanese voicing of Arhat. And an Arhat is an awakened one. So to us it just sounds like sounds, Dai Ajari, Dai Ajari, Dai Ajari. But imagine everyone who meets you says, "Hello, Great Awakened One." And then there are also honorifics that get added to the ends of names. The normal respectful one is San, and a rare one only used for emperors and really important people is Sama. So he was also, people use that with him as well. So it's Dayajari Sama. So hello, Great Awakened One that everyone is completely impressed and amazed by. So let me tell you about his practice. This Buddhism that he's a part of is Tendai Buddhism. And Tendai Buddhism has a really broad range of practices and sort of subsects who emphasize different practices. A lot of different texts they study. They're fans of the Lotus Sutra. So if you've done Lotus Sutra studies yet, here's another group of Lotus Sutra fans. They're all over the place, actually. And Tendai Buddhism dominated Buddhism in Japan from about the year 800 to like the 1300s and into the 1400s, and then it kind of lost its dominance when Zen and Pure Land schools kind of took over, divided up the pie of Japanese Buddhism. And so they kind of reduced down mostly to their sacred mountain. And it's, mountain, we live by really big mountains. It's like a 2,800-foot tall mountain. It's like a small mountain, but it's kind of its own little mountain, and they have the whole place. It's their mountain. And this particular sect that this fellow is a part of, the Marathon Monk sect, the Kaihogyo sect, they think started soon after this whole school started in the 800s. And just in case you're curious, Tendai is also one of those, it's a transplanted version of a Chinese school. Just like Dogen went to China, the founder of Tendai Buddhism named Saicho went to China, was really impressed by his teachers and the school of Buddhism he found there that was called Tiantai in Chinese, and he brought a version of it back to Japan where it did kind of transform. Here's the blurb about Tendai Buddhism from the Wikipedia page. A key part of Tendai Buddhism's teaching is that enlightenment can be attained in the current life. And it's through the process of selfless service and devotion that this can be achieved. The Tendai Buddhists practice selfless service and devotion in many ways, but the Kaihogyo is seen as the ultimate expression of this commitment. So the core of their practice is for 100-day stretches, 100 days in a row, no days off. The Kaihogyo practitioner, who's called a Gyoja, gets up about 2 in the morning, puts on a special dress that's particular to this tradition. He wears white robes, straw sandals, carries a staff and an oil lamp, and wears a very special hat. It's a really interesting looking little hat. I'll put some pictures on the website. I didn't organize to show them tonight, sorry. And the white robe is really significant. Usually people don't wear white in Japan. White is the color of death. So we wear black robes. So that's already pretty weird and extreme to wear white robes. To us it's just a color, I guess, but I think it's a big deal. So anyway, the person gets up at 2 in the morning, puts all this on, and then runs for 25 miles. And it's kind of like a smooth, fast trot. And they keep their upper body really still, and they trot along with their staff and their oil lamp, because it's dark. They do not wear a headlamp. This is an ancient tradition. And this 25-mile run sounds really impressive to us, but actually it's not the important part of their practice. The important part is they stop, sometimes very briefly, sometimes a little longer, in about 260 little trailside shrines every night. And in every one there are different mudras to do and chants to offer and prayers to say. And they do a lot of stuff with their mala beads or juzu beads. That is as ritualized and specific as well. And each of the 260 stops has a little different ritual. We asked him what are the rituals, and he said, sorry, it's secret. So you have to actually do this practice to learn them. As far as I know, no non-Japanese person has attempted it. And all this needs to be finished by the time the temple, the monks wake up back home, back at the temple, and get up to do their regular practice of, morning service, meditation, meals, cleaning, chores, taking care of the temple like a monk does. Because the person doing this Kaihogyo marathon practice is expected to participate just as normal with all that, too. So it's an unbelievably long day. And then you do it again, and again, and again, and again. And this is done for 100 days in a row, the first year. And then I guess they probably go more or less back to their usual daily practice, which is already pretty strenuous, And they do it again the next year and the next year. And the whole thing takes 7 years. And in the end, they will have done they will have done this practice 1,000 times, over 7 years. An interesting side note, I just learned this today, I'm very excited, is that part of the origin story of Kaihogyo is the story in the Lotus Sutra of the Bodhisattva never disparaging. Yeah. So that's the attitude they're supposed to bring to this. The Bodhisattva never disparaging had a unique practice. He was a very humble monk who committed himself to loving and caring for everybody and not giving up on anyone ever, and not offending anybody, not causing any harm whatsoever. And so eventually he figured out the only thing he could safely do was to bow to people and say one thing. And the way it's translated from the Chinese, he doesn't sound great in English, but everyone he ran into would say, I have profound reverence for you. I would never treat you with disparagement. And in the Lotus Sutra, people did treat him right back with disparagement. Oh, you dope, and threw stuff at him. Maybe they threw banana peels, I don't know. So anyway, that spirit of reverence for everyone is what the Kaihogyo practitioner should bring to all their encounters with other humans, but also with all the spirits of the mountain. This is a very spiritual thing. And, I've mentioned this before, but you may have gotten into Zen because you thought it was very rational and there's no gods and spirits. No. There are many, many gods and spirits. There's not one overarching guy with a big beard or anything like that, but there are many. I don't know if they would even say the word gods. It's hard to translate, across languages and cultures, but many mytho-symbolic, probably actually real in a certain way, figures are involved in Japanese Buddhism. And one of the important ones is this really fierce-looking guy named Fudo Myo. Important to these guys. He's got a big scowl, and these really intense eyes, and a sword, and his other hand's in a fist. Sometimes he has stuff in that hand. And then there's he's so intense that flames naturally erupt from the back of his head. And there's flames. And he's not like a violent character. He's a fierce character. And his job is to protect the Dharma. Nobody's messing with this Dharma. And protect the practitioners and protect the world. So he's kind of like the patron saint of this practice. So this intense practice has an intense bodhisattva figure called Fudo Myoho. So let me tell you about the rest of the practice. The first 3 years you do the 100 marathons, about 25 miles. Years 4 and 5 you up it to 200 days in a row instead of 100. In year 6 the route extends from 25 miles to about 35 miles. So you got to get up earlier to get it done in time for the morning. And then in the 7th year, the route leaves the mountain and descends down to the city of Kyoto to include shrines and the people, the people of of the city. Turns to the home leavers return home, to the home dwellers. When we heard about this, Dayajari mentioned it was a recent addition to the routine, which turned out to mean like late 1800s or something. That was recent. So it's just a different frame of time here as well. Since this practice was established sometime in late 800, it's been completed by 51 people, and this was the 50th person that we were talking to and spending the day with. Anyway, when he includes Kyoto for the last year, he's going 50 miles a day. And he's also navigating, with the help of a group of lay supporters, they help him out, going through a modern, busy city, doing this ancient ritual in his straw sandals and white robes and staff and special hat. He has to stop at stoplights and stuff, And he and the ladies who helped organize this, they were English speakers, so they could translate for him. Poor Ray, who was doing great with her Japanese, was at sea with him. He had a weird accent, so she couldn't understand him and some strange expressions. So I think she was actually kind of frustrating because she was trying to figure out her Japanese, and then it was hard for her to hear the English, It's like, what did he say? And they were repeating it, So anyway, it was sweet. She did a great job, Ray. Yeah, it was wonderful. Really took care of things really well. Navigated the culture with us. But anyway, as he's going through Kyoto each day for 100 days, gradually it becomes known this is happening, And the crowds start lining up. And then the crowd starts snarling traffic and causing secondary problems. And then the police are involved. And it becomes this whole big thing. And he does this every night, well, I guess it'd be morning. It'd be daylight by the time to get down to Kyoto. So I think for that last year, they tell him, okay, you don't have to sweep the courtyard anymore. We'll let you sleep, I think. He didn't say that, but I assume so. How can you do 50 miles and get back in time to open the temple, But here's the really intense part. That was the warm-up. During the 5th year, he does an intense meditation retreat called Do-iri, which means entering the temple. Do is temple entering. For this 9-day retreat, his whole assignment is to recite the mantra of Fudo Myo-o. Each different deity, bodhisattva, has their own mantra. So Fudo Myo-o has a mantra you recite. And that's it for 9 days straight. Nothing else should or can be done. So no sleeping, no rest, no food, no water. Yeah, 2 support monks sit by both sides. I think they probably rotate to make sure he doesn't fall over and keep an eye on him and support him. The only thing that happens once a day is he gets up, and through each day the support monks have to help him more. They showed us a picture of him like 5 or 6 days in, and you can kind of tell he's having trouble walking. They get up together and they walk up this trail a little bit to a very special well, which has holy water in it. And his job is to scoop up some water and put it in a bucket and bring it back to Fudo Myo-o as an offering. And as part of that process, he can rinse out his mouth with the water, but he may not drink. And the monks are watching him, make sure to help him not stray. And this is done at 2 a.m. It's like the whole thing. It's like, wow. Can humans imagine a more intense, kind of mystical, life-altering, barely impossible somehow, but is possible way of ritual? It's unbelievable. Funny thing he said was actually rinsing his mouth out made things harder because he got used to no moisture over 23 and a half hours, and then water in his mouth is, jolted his system, reminded him that he hadn't drunk. He told us he figures that a human can survive for maybe 7 days with that kind of practice, without drinking and eating or resting. This is 9 days long. So he knows the reason why he's still alive is that Fudo Myoho helped him. This fierce character helped him. And then it was Fudo's energy, I don't know what word to use exactly, energy, power, love, but it was Fudo Myoho that helped him through. It wasn't self-power, it wasn't his effort, it wasn't gritting his teeth. It was letting go into the embrace of this fierce protector. So we got to have some question and answer, and we're actually sitting inside the hall where he did this meditation retreat, which was powerful. We were in the Myodo, and one of the first questions somebody asked him was like, the first thing we would think about, right? Did you ever think about giving up? He kind of shook his head. I don't remember exactly what he said. I don't know if anyone you guys remember, but it's kind of like he kind of shook his head and said, that question doesn't compute. What? Giving up? Like it just didn't occur to him over 7 years, He had set out to do this. He was literally doing it one step at a time. And that was his whole entire life. Maybe it helped that he grew up in the monastic establishment in some way. He ordained pretty young, and apparently his family of origin was, I'm not sure, impoverished or not able to totally take care of him in some way. It was not clear. And he was more or less adopted by his teacher. His teacher became kind of his adopted father too. So this was his family, And like I was saying, coming out of this just kind, humble, a little reserved, maybe. I got to sit across from him at lunch, and there was zero small talk or gestures or even looking at me, as far as I could tell, until I finally thought of a question to ask him, and then he answered. All this was through the translator, which adds a little layer of awkwardness, so I don't want to read anything to that. He seemed like a perfectly warm guy. As we were walking along, we found the new guy, the next guy was there like weeding the garden or something. And our Dayajari asked him how it was going, and he had much trouble with leeches. It sounds like he kind of said, "Hey, how are the leeches?" They have some kind of ground-born leeches on this mountain, so that's a problem if you're in straw sandals in the middle of the night. Maybe that was one of the steps to get the leeches off. And then what happened next, apparently, is he just had more responsibilities. Needs to teach young monks. I'm sure he would have been welcome to still live in the temple as an ordinary monk, but he was not offered like the abbot's position or this new special anything. What he ended up doing was moving off the mountain and taking over an abandoned temple and gathering support from the local village to help him fix it up and learning how to grow rice. In Japan, all over this part of central Japan, there's still very small farm rice growers. Which actually, it turns out because Japan has enormous tariffs on the enormous rice farms other places, but that's another story. But they keep that tradition alive. So that's what he's doing. Hanging out in the village, running this little temple, growing rice. He didn't go on a speaking circuit. He didn't write a book. Didn't do any workshops. He's not giving motivational speeches. He's taking care of his rice and his students, and little by little repairing this temple. Spending a day with tourists once in a while. The ladies who organized it said usually the few groups they've taken to see him, this is only the 4th or 5th time or something they've done this, most of the other groups have been full of athletes who want to just like look at him and say, can I see your quads, or something, He doesn't look really pumped or anything. He looks fit, But I think for him that wasn't the main part at all, At one point we asked if he still ran, and he said, yeah, a little. No, it was more about this engagement with the spirits and places of the sacred mountain. It was about the merit and spiritual energy generated by doing this practice. It was about his being willing to do this to keep this tradition alive. It was about letting go of his own agenda completely. So I don't think he expected anything out of it, and he probably kind of knew from the previous. There had been a little cluster of them, only 51 over hundreds of years, and then there's been 3 or 4, maybe 5 in the 20th and 21st century. So it's having a bit of a revival, I guess, this practice, which is kind of amazing. So similarly, last week I was telling you about Tom Kirshner we enjoyed meeting. Same kind of thing. Not as picture book amazing as the marathon thing, but he was the American who moved to Kyoto in the 70s because he just kind of fell in love with the idea of that, Eastern culture and Japan, and discovered how much that was informed by Buddhism when he got there, and then fell head over heels for Buddhism, ordained as a monk. And he's the only American known, I think, who's gone through like the complete Rinzai Zen training there. And it sounds like he kind of did it like multiple times in multiple places. He said each place had a different method. So I think he did the whole thing like 3 times or something. And this was a lot of intense Zen practice, kind of like for us for being on sesshin, and a harder sesshin than we do, for 90-day stretches in a row, where you do not leave. You're in the middle of this bustling city, but you do not leave that monastic enclosure. You get up early, you do a ton of zazen, you work, there's very little rest. And then the funny part, he says, then we finally go to bed, I forget what he said, 10 o'clock or something at night, but we don't really go to bed. The form is to lie down, spread out our futon and our quilt, which is kept in a little box behind your seat in the meditation hall. They all live together in the meditation hall. The lights are turned off, and then we all jump up to go do more meditation outside in the garden. And he said, I don't remember any of that meditation in the garden. I slept through all of it. But also humble. He didn't say it's a weird custom. I don't think they should do that anymore. He's like, yeah, that's just what happened, yeah. Then I kind of snoozed, sitting up in a garden, and this was year-round, so including in winter. They get to wear thicker robes in winter, but the buildings are unheated, and there's no heat. That was the practice, so that's what he did. So we're sitting in one of the zendos, one of the monks' halls, sodos, where he trained, and that was a moving moment for me. We were sitting in there, we did a period of zazen, and he explained kind of what the daily schedule is for the monks in training, and he shared with us there's not that many of them anymore. I kind of knew this, but it's even more than I knew. He described all that, I'll come back to that. And then he said, yeah, and I lived for 5 years on that seat there. I was just like, well, come again? This was your house? For 5 years? He also greeted us. I showed a picture of him to my friend Koshin, who connected us. And I kind of suspected this, but Koshin clarified. When he greeted us at the temple gate, he was wearing beginner monk's robes. He was wearing his novice robes. The great big belt he was wearing, that was the belt that the new monks wear. And his rakusu was kind of falling apart. And he was just the sweetest, most humble guy, They gave him a little place to live at the gatehouse, and he teaches, foreign groups like us. He greets foreign groups like ours, and does a little of this and a little of that. Got married late in life. He's enjoying that. And he said, I just love Zen. I said, I just like to practice. Yeah, I guess, But same thing, He could have written a bunch of books about his intense practice and his success. This includes passing all the koan systems, which are very hard to do. And they're done in cryptic, archaic Japanese, too. And everything's has to be memorized in archaic Japanese. So he did an unbelievable thing, actually. And it could have just been Joe anybody, meeting him. So it's a fascinating thing to me, these couple of examples of intense practice. And making me think back when I started at San Francisco Zen Center in the 1980s. It was more intense then than it is there now, and certainly more intense there than here, then and now. I don't remember the full schedule of the first sesshin I sat, for instance, but I think it was something like 4 a.m. wake up, 9 p.m. bed, a dozen or so 40-minute Zazen periods, really long Dharma talks, brief breaks, and they asked us not to ever bathe, because that would be too, I don't know what, I never quite heard the rationale for that exactly. No sensory pleasures. I'm 20, 21, 20, almost 21 actually, yeah. And it absolutely was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, no question, Intense physical comfort, intense anxiety and edginess, and I didn't sleep very well, and the whole thing kind of came a blur after a while. I really didn't understand. I kind of half understood that I was trying too hard. At one point, if you press on your eyeballs from the outside, you can kind of make these little swimmers, this little swimmery image. I somehow got bug-eyed enough that I could do that by pressing from the inside of my eyeballs. I was seeing these little swimmers all the time. So I had no idea how tense I was. Although I did get a little clue. When the final bell, the final period rang, and I made the enormous strategic mistake also of counting up how many periods a day and multiplying by 7 and counting them down. And if you do that, sure enough, when you're at your most miserable, it's going to be a very large number to go, Like, it's really better not to know. It really is better not to know. It really is true about just being in the, the being in the moment thing. It's really true, actually. And this is like a hard way to learn that, but a powerful way. Anyway, when that final bell rang, I felt this incredible release. It was just like, all this tension fell out. And I suddenly was like floating on air. I was so happy, I was just like, and suddenly I was like, something went from this is the worst, hardest thing I've ever done to, this is the best thing I've ever done. This was amazing. And then I decided it was both. That was the hardest thing I've ever done and the best thing I've ever done. So, I don't know, did I learn something that I wouldn't have learned if it was a gentler schedule, and plus I'd just been a little wiser about it, not pushed myself so very hard. I don't know, but I believe I learned something important because it was hard, because I made it harder. I guess in a way it doesn't matter what we do. We'll each make it hard in our own ways, so I don't know why I'm even worrying about this. But and there are plenty of stories of intense practice leading to sudden realizations and some kind of clarity and some kind of big something. And there are plenty of verified stories of hard practice and intense schedules triggering all kinds of harms. Psychological harms, mostly. People going into, psychotic or semi-psychotic states that are hard to get out of after the meditation ends. There's at least one suicide associated with one of the 10-day Vipassana retreats run by the Goenka followers, which is a weird, very interesting phenomenon. If you've never experienced it, I've only heard about it myself, but I've heard a lot about it. It's kind of amazing. They offer this intense meditation retreat all over the place for free, but it's very intense. And the basic message they give everybody at that retreat is stick it out. Stick it out no matter what. Do not move. Do not leave. You're here to do this, so do it. And they don't have very experienced teachers usually, it turns out either. So I don't know. I'm not coming to any conclusions here. Maybe in the end it comes down to being really supported, hopefully by teachers with little experience of this all. Really to be supported, to be aware of what you're doing, how you're doing it, and to be in choice, to have a choice. Because sometimes it is good to stick with something. You learn something you wouldn't learn if you stopped too soon, And other times that's also absolutely the wrong thing to do. You're just hurting yourself. In the early days, a stock phrase that you heard all the time, well, there are two stock phrases, neither of them that helpful. One of them was, just sit with it. That was like pretty much in every case, just sit with it. And another is, it's good for your practice. You knew I was going to say that. You heard both these constantly, you know. Well-intentioned usually, sometimes a little manipulative, you know. Sometimes out of somebody's insecurity, they're projecting on you, you know. You should just sit with that. I'm like, yeah, you need to say it. And now we know that just sit with is not the right answer all the time. But neither is it never the right answer. There are things to explore deeply with the support of emptiness, settledness, your Dharma friends supporting you in silence, people taking the forms to heart and practicing with care. Some of my colleagues have also suggested another kind of duality, and these are dualities, which makes them a little bit limiting. Like, of course, it's all interwoven, really. Easy, hard, you know, it's all much more subtle than that. Anyway, another way to think about it is that in our centers, there's kind of two overlapping paths that are happening. One is the path of healing. And you hear about this, you know, people feel better, you know. Some of the stuff works out, we feel a little less anxious, less crazy, less this, less that, more settled, more open, more whole, you know. This is the path of healing. And that's often what we need, you know. And probably the path of healing works best with gentleness in the Zendo, with kindness, with flexibility. You know, please lie down, please take a rest, you know. No need to push. But there's also a path that was overemphasized in the early days. It's kind of a path of transformation, a path of everything kind of turning around. Seeing, and sometimes there's some degree of immediacy to this, sometimes not. It can be equally gradual. Just getting it into your bones that it's not the way you thought it was. You, the universe, and that the one who needs the healing is already healed, and always was. And there is no healing in illness. But that's also true. And there's a tremendous freedom and joy in that. And so maybe the path of transformation is served best by strong practices. I don't really know. I'm just kind of bringing it up. But yeah, again, maybe the best thing is the both and. Taking the practice seriously. We're not here to goof off, really, you know. We can enjoy each other, but taking it seriously. And feeling into when is it time to hold ourselves in some firmness, some clarity, and some deliberateness. And when is it time to relax? When is it time to be gentle? When is it time to give ourselves a break? To leave early tonight. To take care of ourselves in that way. So we need both, I think, really. And to let these paths interbe. So I don't know if Dayajari, when he's trotting around in his mountain in the dark, thought about any of this. Maybe not. He grew up in that environment, and this was like part of that world. I think for him, that intense practice felt pretty normal, actually. Just one of the choices, one of the things that people do out of love for the Dharma, love for their mountain, love for the world. I don't think he was in denial about it being hard, you know. I think he wasn't just like, no big deal, you know. He had to pace himself, he had to stay committed, he had to keep himself going somehow. But I think he allowed himself to immerse himself so deeply that it wasn't like, I have to motivate myself. I am just doing this practice. I am doing this practice. One step at a time, forever. Supposedly, if you do the math, the amount of running they do in the 7 years is the same as the circumference of the whole Earth. Here's a guy who's done a ritual run all the way around the Earth. So, anyway, I'll email out the pictures or put them on the website and stuff. I wanted to show you, but didn't pull it off. Thank you for listening.